When my mother-in-law asked to stay with us for 2 weeks after her divorce, I didn't even think about arguing. I genuinely felt sorry for her. But just 1 week later, she hung a sheet of paper on the wall with the title, House Rules, and my wife said, "Mom is right. This will make things easier for everyone." At the time, I had no idea that 2 weeks later, those very rules would destroy our marriage. My mother-in-law's name was Linda. She had been married for almost 30 years, and according to her, the divorce had come completely out of nowhere. According to her ex-husband, it had been coming since approximately 1998. I didn't know all the details, and honestly, I didn't want to. There are certain things a man doesn't need to know. All I knew was that Linda needed somewhere to stay while she looked for a new apartment. 2 weeks, my wife Emily told me. Maybe less. Whenever someone says maybe less, it usually means definitely more. Still, I agreed. Linda was family. She was going through a difficult time, and our guest room was empty. Besides, how much trouble could one recently divorced woman cause in 14 days? That question would soon join the long list of stupid things I had once believed. Linda arrived on a Sunday afternoon with 4 suitcases, 6 bags, 3 boxes, and a decorative lamp she claimed she couldn't sleep without. I looked at the pile of luggage, then at Emily. I thought she was staying for 2 weeks? "She likes to be prepared," Emily whispered. Prepared for what? A 2-week visit or the collapse of civilization? I carried everything into the guest room while Linda followed behind me, carefully explaining where each bag should go. "That suitcase needs to stay upright. Don't put that box near the radiator. Be careful with the lamp." By the time I finished, I felt less like a son-in-law and more like an unpaid airport employee. Still, I said nothing. Linda thanked me, hugged Emily, and spent the rest of the evening quietly unpacking. For the first few days, she was almost invisible. She woke up late, made her own coffee, kept mostly to the guest room. She even washed her dishes immediately after using them. I remember thinking that living together might actually be easy. That was adorable. By the 4th day, Linda started offering little observations. Not complaints, not yet. Just harmless comments delivered in the calm voice of someone who had already judged you and was now waiting for you to improve. One morning, I was making coffee when she entered the kitchen. She looked at the clock, then at me. In my house, the man always woke up first. I glanced at the time. It was 6:45 in the morning. Emily was still asleep because she didn't have to leave for work until 9. "I do wake up first," I said. Linda smiled. "Yes, but a man should use that time to prepare breakfast for his wife." I lifted my coffee mug. "I am preparing breakfast. For yourself." "Well, I know exactly how I like it." She didn't laugh. That should have been my first warning. The next evening, I came home from work and sat down on the couch for 10 minutes before dinner. Linda walked past me, stopped, and looked at my phone. A real husband shouldn't spend the whole evening staring at a screen. I checked the clock. I had been home for approximately 4 minutes. I'm answering a work message. A man should leave work at work. I nodded. Excellent idea. I'll tell my boss Linda approved it. Again, no laugh. Emily heard the conversation from the kitchen. "She's just trying to help," she said. I looked toward the kitchen. I didn't realize I had submitted an application. Emily rolled her eyes. "Don't start." I wasn't starting anything. At that point, I was still treating Linda's comments like background noise. Annoying, but technically survivable. Then the phrases began repeating. "In my house, a man always. A real husband should. A woman should never have to." It didn't matter what I was doing. If I cooked, I was doing it wrong. If I didn't cook, I wasn't helping enough. If I came home early, I should have brought groceries. If I came home 10 minutes late, I clearly didn't respect my family. One evening, I told Emily I was going to meet my friend Mark for a beer after work. Linda looked up from her tea. "Does your wife know?" Emily was standing right beside me. "She does now," I said. Linda ignored that. A husband should always ask his wife before making evening plans. I looked at Emily. May I go outside after work? Emily sighed. You know that's not what Mom means. I know exactly what she means. I'm just trying to determine whether I need written permission. Linda placed her cup on the table. There's no need to be sarcastic. There was absolutely a need to be sarcastic. Sarcasm was the only legal weapon available to me. Emily gave me a warning look, so I dropped the subject. That became the pattern. Linda made a comment. I made a joke. Linda became offended. Emily told me not to create tension. Apparently, tension was something only I could create. Linda was merely importing it in large quantities. Then, exactly 1 week after she moved in, I came home and found a sheet of paper hanging on the living room wall. It was positioned right beside our family photos, centered, straight, impossible to miss. Across the top, in large, bold letters, were the words, House Rules. I stood in front of it for several seconds. There were 7 rules, all neatly numbered, all written as if our home had recently been converted into a minimum security prison. Rule number 1, the husband must wake up before everyone else and prepare breakfast. Rule number 2, after work, the husband must come straight home. Rule number 3, no evenings out with friends. Rule number 4, all purchases must be discussed and approved in advance. Rule number 5, the husband's salary must first go into the shared household budget, managed by the wife. Rule number 6, weekends must be spent together as a family. All 3 family members should participate. That one was especially interesting. Apparently, Linda had promoted herself from temporary guest to 3rd member of our marriage. Then I read the final rule. Rule number 7. The husband must report where he is going and what time he will return. I read the list twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the human brain has no appropriate reaction available and simply presses the laughter button. Emily was sitting on the couch. Linda was in the armchair beside her. They were both watching me. I pointed at the paper. Is this a joke? Linda answered with a completely serious expression. No. While I'm living here, this is how things should be. I waited for Emily to say something, to laugh, to tell her mother that she had lost her mind somewhere between the guest room and the printer. Instead, Emily looked at the list again. Then she said, Mom, actually, I think it's a good idea. That was the moment I stopped smiling. For a few seconds, I just stood there looking at Emily, then at Linda, then back at the list. I was waiting for somebody to smile. Nobody did. That was unfortunate because the situation desperately needed a laugh track. You think this is a good idea? I asked. Emily shrugged. Not every single word, maybe, but the general idea. The general idea being what? That we need more structure. We've been married for 6 years, I said. Why are we only discovering now that I apparently need a 7-point rehabilitation program? Linda folded her hands in her lap. This is exactly the attitude I'm talking about. What attitude? You treat everything like a joke. I'm standing in my own living room reading a document that says I need permission to buy things. I'm working with the material I've been given. Emily sighed. Can you please not make this into a fight? That was one of her favorite phrases. It usually appeared immediately after someone else had done something insane, and I had noticed. I'm not making it into anything, I said. Your mother wrote rules for me. They're for the household, Linda corrected. I pointed to the first line. It says the husband. Unless you've secretly married someone in the guest room, I think we know who the target audience is. Linda's mouth tightened. Emily rubbed her forehead. Just try some of them. I looked at her. Try them? Yes, for 1 week. Mom is only here temporarily anyway. Linda nodded as if this were a reasonable compromise and not a hostage negotiation. 1 week. I should have refused immediately. I should have taken the paper down, folded it into a small airplane, and launched it through an open window. Instead, I told myself I was being mature. That was my second mistake. My first mistake had been saying yes to the 2-week stay. My third would be believing there were only 3 mistakes coming. "All right," I said. 1 week. Emily smiled with relief. Linda smiled with victory. The next morning, I got up first and made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee, nothing fancy. I wasn't auditioning for a cooking show. I placed everything on the table and called Emily and Linda. Emily sat down and smiled. "This is nice." Linda took 1 bite of her eggs, then another. Then she looked at me. "They're cold." I stared at her plate. Steam was still rising from it. "They were in the pan 30 seconds ago." "You should have called us sooner." "I called you as soon as I finished." "Well, then you should have timed it better." Of course. The eggs had failed to account for Linda's morning schedule. A rookie mistake. Emily gave me a small look that meant, "Please don't say anything." So I didn't. I ate my breakfast in silence. The next day, I made pancakes. Linda said they were too sweet. The day after that, I made oatmeal. She said it was too plain. On Thursday, I made toast and placed butter, jam, and peanut butter on the table. Linda looked at the options. "So now we have to make our own breakfast?" I looked at Emily. Emily suddenly became very interested in her coffee. That was how the week began. Every rule had apparently come with a hidden quality control department, and Linda was the only employee. I came home directly after work. On Monday, I arrived at 6:10. Linda was standing in the hallway. "You're late." "I left the office at 5:30. You normally get home by 6. "There was traffic." She checked the wall clock. 10 minutes of traffic? "No, Linda. I stopped on the way to begin a new life." She frowned. I asked a simple question, and I gave you a more interesting answer. Emily appeared from the kitchen. "Why are you two already arguing?" "We're not arguing," Linda said calmly. "I'm just trying to understand why he was late." I took off my jacket. "Good news. The investigation is complete. It was traffic." Emily looked at me. "You could have texted. It would have taken 2 seconds." I nodded. "Next time I'll issue an emergency alert." Emily crossed her arms. "See? This is what Mom means. You can never answer normally." That sentence stayed with me, because I had answered normally. Traffic. 1 word. Perfectly normal. The problem was that my answer hadn't included an apology. By Tuesday, Linda had begun monitoring greetings. I came home, opened the door, and said, "Hey." She looked offended. "That's it?" I paused with 1 shoe half off. "What else were you expecting?" "A proper greeting." I straightened up. "Good evening, Lady Linda. The carriage awaits." Emily called from the living room. "Stop it." Linda shook her head. "In my house, everyone greeted each other with respect." I nodded. "And how did that work out?" She narrowed her eyes. I smiled and walked away. That was before the divorce comment. At that point, I was still warming up. The trash became another issue. One evening, I finished dinner and sat down for a few minutes. Linda entered the room carrying a small bag. "The trash is full. I'll take it out in a minute." "Why not now?" "Because I just sat down. It will only take a minute." "Exactly, which is why it can happen in a minute." She stood there holding the bag and looking at me as though I had refused to help evacuate a burning building. Emily glanced up from her phone. "Can you just take it out?" I looked at her. I said I would. "Then do it." I stood up. Not because Linda had asked. Not because Emily had asked. Because I could feel my blood pressure trying to climb out through my ears. I took the bag. Linda smiled. "Thank you. Was that so difficult?" I looked at the trash bag in my hand, then at her. "Carrying this?" "No." I paused. "The rest of it is getting harder." She pretended not to understand. Linda was very talented at that. By Wednesday, my evenings had become scheduled family sessions. No friends, no going out, no sitting in another room for too long. We had to spend time together, all 3 of us. That phrase appeared constantly. Linda seemed especially attached to it. She chose the movies. She chose what we ordered for dinner. She chose when the television was too loud. She even chose where we sat. One night, I took my usual place on the couch. Linda looked at me. I sit there. I stared at her. You've been here 10 days. And I've been sitting there every evening. I've been sitting there for 6 years. Emily patted the other side of the couch. Just sit here. I moved, not because it mattered. Because apparently I was now participating in an exchange program where I gave up small pieces of my life and received nothing in return. Thursday brought the budget discussion. Emily met me in the kitchen after work. She had a notebook in front of her. Linda was sitting beside her. "What's this?" I asked. Emily smiled carefully. "We're going through the household expenses." "We?" "Mom has a lot of experience with budgeting." That was a bold claim for a woman whose marriage had recently dissolved and who was currently living in our guest room. Still, I sat down. Emily showed me a list of bills: mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance. Nothing unusual. Then she pointed to a separate line. "From now on, your salary should go into the joint account first." It already does. Most of it does. Because I keep some in my personal account. Linda leaned forward. "That creates secrecy in a marriage." I looked at her. "It creates enough money for me to buy lunch without forming a committee." Emily ignored that. "Mom thinks it would be better if all the money went into one place." "And who controls that place?" Emily hesitated. "I would." I nodded slowly. "So the rule is exactly what the paper says. It's not about control. Whenever someone says something is not about control, it is almost always about control." "It's about transparency," Linda added. I looked at her. "You've been living here for less than 2 weeks. Why do you need transparency into my salary?" "Because financial discipline is important. So is privacy. In a healthy marriage, there should be no privacy." I leaned back in my chair. That sentence explained a lot about Linda, possibly her entire divorce. Emily closed the notebook. "Let's not do this now." "Excellent idea," I said. "Let's never do it." She looked annoyed. "You agreed to try." "I agreed to breakfast and coming home after work. I didn't agree to hand over every dollar I make because your mother discovered spreadsheets." Linda pushed the notebook away. "You're being defensive." "No, I'm being married to one person." Emily's face changed, only slightly, but I saw it. "You don't have to be rude." "I'm not being rude. You keep making comments about Mom being here." "Because Mom keeps making decisions about me being here." Linda stood up. "I'm going to my room." She said it in the wounded voice of a woman who had just been attacked while peacefully attempting a financial takeover. Emily waited until the guest room door closed. Then she turned to me. "Was that necessary?" "What part?" "All of it." I laughed once, quietly, mostly because the alternative was shouting. "Emily, your mother put rules on our wall. She critiques my breakfast, checks what time I come home, tells me how to greet her, and now wants control over my salary. She's trying to help." "No, she's trying to run the house. She's going through a divorce." That explanation had become magical. Apparently, divorce gave Linda temporary authority over traffic, garbage, finances, and my free time. "I know she's going through a divorce," I said. "I've been reminded every 14 minutes. She needs patience. I have been patient. You've been sarcastic." "That is how I remain patient." Emily shook her head and walked away. That evening, she barely spoke to me. Linda emerged from the guest room 20 minutes later, looking completely recovered. Remarkable woman. Her emotional injuries healed faster than professional athletes. By Friday, I understood something important. The rules were never really about breakfast, or money, or friends. They were about obedience. Linda would make a demand. I was supposed to follow it. If I resisted, Emily would call me difficult. If I made a joke, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, Linda found another task. And every day, Emily moved a little closer to her mother's side of the room. It happened slowly, almost invisibly. At first, she said, "Mom means well." Then, "Can you just do it?" Then, "Why do you always have to argue?" By the end of the week, she had stopped asking whether the rules were reasonable. She only asked why I wasn't following them properly. Saturday morning, I made breakfast again. Linda sat down, tasted the coffee, and frowned. "This is weak." I looked at the cup. "It's coffee, Linda, not a political leader." Emily closed her eyes. "Please, not today." "What did I do?" "You know exactly what you're doing." I did. I was trying to survive breakfast without losing my mind. Linda set the cup down. "A man should be able to accept criticism without turning everything into a performance." I looked at her. "A guest should be able to drink free coffee without writing a review." Emily pushed her chair back. "I'm done with this." She stood and carried her plate to the sink. Linda followed her. I remained at the table. Apparently, I had failed breakfast again. At that point, I had spent almost a week following rules I had never agreed with, inside a home I helped pay for, to satisfy a woman who was supposed to be staying temporarily. And somehow, I was still the problem. I should have understood then that the week of patience was over, but the real fight didn't begin until that evening. That evening, I came home expecting the usual routine. Take off my shoes, change into something comfortable, pretend the laminated list on the wall didn't exist. Unfortunately, Linda had other plans. Dinner had barely ended when she looked around the kitchen, nodded to herself, and stood up. She pointed at the sink. "Tonight, you're cleaning the entire kitchen." I looked behind me. There was nobody else there. "I'm sorry?" "The kitchen," she repeated. "It needs to be cleaned." I glanced around. The plates were already stacked. The counters looked fine. "I'll wash my plate," I said. Linda shook her head. "No, the entire kitchen." I looked at Emily. She avoided eye contact by suddenly becoming fascinated with her glass of water. "Why?" I asked. Linda answered as though she were explaining basic mathematics to a child. "Because a real husband helps women." I couldn't help smiling. There it was again, a real husband. Apparently, somewhere in America, there was an official handbook titled Certified Real Husband, and Linda had memorized every page. "I already help," I said calmly. "I cook breakfast every morning now. I take out the trash. I come straight home after work. I've been following your little constitution all week." She folded her arms. "And now you can clean the kitchen." I leaned back in my chair. "Did you make your ex-husband follow rules like these too?" The room went completely silent. Emily slowly looked up. Linda froze. For the first time since moving into our house, she didn't have an answer ready. I wasn't finished. "So," I said quietly, "did you?" She stared at me for several seconds. Then she looked away. I nodded to myself. "I see." Linda's face turned bright red. "That has nothing to do with this." "I think it has everything to do with this." Emily finally spoke. "Jason," I raised one hand. "No, I'd actually like to know." I looked back at Linda. "Did your husband have to report where he was going?" "No." "Did he need permission before buying something?" She remained silent. "Did he have to ask whether he was allowed to meet his friends?" Still nothing. I smiled. "Interesting." Linda suddenly slammed her hand on the table. "Don't you dare judge my marriage." "I'm not judging it." I shrugged. "I'm just beginning to understand why it ended." The silence that followed was almost impressive. You could hear the refrigerator humming. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Even the clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder. Then Linda exploded. "How dare you!" She shot up from her chair. "I sacrificed 30 years of my life for my family. I gave everything to my husband. I raised a daughter, and this is the respect I get?" I stayed where I was. I asked a simple question. "You insulted me." "I asked whether your own husband lived by these rules." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You know absolutely nothing about my marriage." "You're right," I nodded. But judging by the divorce, something clearly wasn't working. Emily stood up so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over. "That's enough!" She looked furious, not at her mother, at me. "You owe Mom an apology." I blinked. For what? For saying something so cruel. Cruel? I laughed quietly. "Emily, your mother has spent the last week criticizing everything I do. My breakfast, my schedule, my friends, my money, and now she's trying to order me around in my own house." Emily crossed her arms. "She was only asking you to help." I looked at the kitchen. "I already help." Not enough. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not enough. After 6 years of marriage, after paying half the mortgage, after working full-time, after spending an entire week following rules I had never agreed to, apparently I still wasn't doing enough. Linda looked at Emily with quiet satisfaction. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Emily was saying everything for her. "Just apologize," Emily said. "It isn't that difficult." I looked from my wife to my mother-in-law. One expected obedience, the other expected surrender. I slowly stood up. The kitchen became completely quiet again. "No." Emily frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly that. I'm not apologizing." Linda let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "There it is. The disrespect." I looked at her. "No. The disrespect started when you moved into our home and decided you had the right to manage my marriage." Emily's face hardened. "I can't believe you're talking to my mother like this," I answered calmly. "And I can't believe you're defending this." Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Linda picked up her cup. "I'm going to my room." She walked away without another word. Emily watched her disappear down the hallway. Then she slowly turned back toward me. The disappointment on her face wasn't directed at the person who had tried to take control of our home. It was directed at me. That's when I realized something I should have understood days earlier. This wasn't me against Linda anymore. It was becoming me against both of them. The next morning, Emily barely spoke to me. She made herself coffee, picked up her phone, scrolled through it while pretending I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. Normally, after an argument, one of us would crack a joke, usually me. She'd roll her eyes. I'd make another one. 5 minutes later, we'd be fine. This time, nothing. Linda, on the other hand, looked surprisingly refreshed. Amazing how well some people sleep after setting someone else's marriage on fire. She walked into the kitchen wearing a robe, smiled at Emily, then looked at me as if last night's argument had never happened. "Good morning," I nodded. "Morning." She sat down. "Did you make breakfast?" I looked at the empty stove. "No." She frowned. "But that's the rule." I took a sip of coffee. "So is minding your own business." Emily slammed her mug onto the counter. "Jason." "What?" "You don't have to answer everything like that." I looked at her. "And your mother doesn't have to treat me like an employee." Emily shook her head. I grabbed my keys. "I'm getting breakfast on the way." Linda looked genuinely offended. "So the family won't be eating together?" I smiled politely. "The family can still eat together?" I paused. "I'm just not cooking." I left before either of them could answer. Honestly, that breakfast sandwich I bought on the way to work tasted better than anything I'd eaten all week, probably because nobody graded it. The rest of the day, I kept replaying everything in my head. Maybe I really had been too sarcastic. Maybe I should have ignored Linda. Maybe. Then I caught myself. No, this wasn't about sarcasm. This was about boundaries. Any normal guest would say, "Thanks for letting me stay." Linda had skipped straight to, "Here's how you'll be living from now on." Those aren't the same thing, not even close. When I got home that evening, I immediately noticed something new. The laminated rules were still hanging on the wall. But now, there was another sheet of paper underneath them. At first, I honestly thought Linda had added more rules. I wouldn't even have been surprised. Maybe Rule 8. The husband shall breathe only after receiving written approval. Instead, I walked closer. My name was at the top. Below it, 7 empty signature lines. I stared at the page for several seconds. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to believe this was actually happening. Emily walked out of the bedroom. "Oh, you saw it." "I did." She sounded almost nervous. "Mom thinks it'll avoid future misunderstandings." I looked back at the paper. What exactly am I signing? The rules. I turned slowly toward her. "You want me to sign this?" "It just means we're all agreeing to respect the same expectations." "These aren't family expectations. They're your mother's expectations." Emily folded her arms. "They're reasonable." I stared at her. "Reasonable? Jason, would you sign a paper saying you have to ask me before buying shoes?" She hesitated. "That's different." "How?" "It just is." "No." I shook my head. "It's only different because this time I'm the one expected to obey." Linda entered the room as if she'd been listening from the hallway. Knowing Linda, she probably had. "Have you signed it yet?" she asked. I looked at her. "No." She smiled patiently. "I'll leave you some time to think." "I don't need time." Her smile disappeared. "My answer is no." Silence. Linda looked at Emily. Emily looked at me. Then back at Linda. Finally, Emily spoke. "Jason." Her voice was calmer now, almost persuasive. "You don't have to agree with every rule." "Then why would I sign it?" "It's symbolic. So is a white flag." Nobody laughed. Emily took a slow breath. "Can you at least start following them properly?" I looked at her. "I've spent an entire week trying." "You've argued the whole time." "I've been criticized the whole time." "You always have an answer." "Because I keep getting accused of imaginary crimes." Linda interrupted. "That's enough." "No," I said calmly. I pointed toward the wall. "This isn't a marriage anymore." I tapped the paper. "This is your mother's project." Emily's expression changed. The frustration she'd been holding back all week finally surfaced. "If you can't respect my mother and live by these rules, then maybe you don't belong in this house?" The room became completely still. Even Linda looked surprised she'd actually said it. I looked at Emily, waiting for her to realize what she'd just done, waiting for her to smile, to say she didn't mean it. She didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms. "If you can't be part of this family, then pack your things and leave. Nobody here is going to keep adjusting to you." I didn't answer immediately. I simply stood there for several seconds, looking at my wife, looking at the woman standing beside her. Then I smiled, not because I was happy, because something inside me had finally become very, very clear. "You know," I said quietly. "Thank you." Emily frowned. "For what?" "For finally making everything crystal clear." Without another word, I turned around, walked past them, entered our bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out my travel bag. I calmly folded my clothes, packed my laptop, grabbed my charger, my toothbrush, a few personal things. After a few minutes, I zipped the bag closed, picked it up, walked back into the hallway. Emily was waiting near the front door. She still looked annoyed. Linda stood a few steps behind her with the expression of someone who believed she'd just won a very important battle. Emily opened the door. "Fine," she shrugged. "Go." Then she added, "You'll come back when you've learned to respect our family." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob, turned around one last time, looked straight at her. "No," I spoke calmly. "I'll only come back when this apartment becomes our home again, instead of a branch office of your mother's house." Then I opened the door, walked out, and quietly closed it behind me. The door closed behind me. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Linda smiled. Finally, a real smile. "Now the house will be peaceful again." Emily let out a tired sigh. He'll cool off. Linda nodded confidently. Of course he will. He has nowhere else to go. He'll be back tomorrow. He'll apologize. Emily wanted to believe that. So did Linda. Neither of them knew me as well as they thought. I checked into a small extended stay hotel a few miles from work. Nothing fancy. Just a clean room, a bed, and most importantly, no laminated rules on the walls. That night, I slept better than I had all week. The next morning, my phone stayed silent. No messages, no calls. Apparently, they were still waiting for me to come crawling back. I didn't. The second day passed the same way. On the third day, my phone finally buzzed. It was Emily. How long are you going to keep acting offended? I read the message, locked my phone, didn't answer. A few hours later, another one arrived. Maybe it's time to stop this childish drama. I smiled. Interesting. She was the one who had thrown me out, yet somehow I was the one creating drama. I ignored that message too. On the fourth day, she finally called. I declined the call. A minute later, she called again. I declined it again. 30 seconds later, another call. Then a text appeared. Can we please talk? This time I replied. Just one sentence. I thought you were the one who told me to leave. She didn't answer. 2 more days passed. Saturday afternoon, someone knocked on my hotel room door. I already knew who it was. Emily stood outside. How she found me, I had no idea. Maybe she was driving around to all the hotels, looking for where my car would be parked. She looked tired, not angry anymore, just exhausted. Can we talk? I stepped aside. She walked in and looked around the room. I can't believe you're actually staying here. I can, she sighed. You took everything way too personally. I looked at her. Did I? Mom's going through a divorce. She wasn't trying to control you. I raised an eyebrow. She literally wrote rules for my life. Emily rubbed her forehead. She was just trying to create order. You could have just been a little more patient. I looked her straight in the eyes. I was patient for a whole week. Then you told me that if I couldn't live by your mother's rules, I didn't belong in my own home. She opened her mouth, closed it again. I continued calmly. So I simply did exactly what you asked. For the first time since all of this started, Emily had absolutely nothing to say. Finally, she spoke. So, what happens now? That depends on you. She frowned. What does that mean? It means I'm not the one who threw my spouse out. I was angry. So was I. I shook my head. You don't get to blame this on one bad evening. This started the moment your mother moved in, and every single time she crossed a line, you stood beside her instead of beside me. Emily looked down. I just didn't want to hurt Mom. And hurting your husband was easier? She had no answer. I thought you'd calm down and come back. I know. That's why you told me to leave. She sighed. So, you're really not coming home? I answered without hesitation. Not while your mother is living there. Emily looked surprised. You want me to throw her out? I want my wife to decide whether she's married to me or to her mother's opinions. Another long silence. Finally, she left. I need time. So do I. She walked away. I honestly thought she'd finally understood. I was wrong. The very next evening, my phone rang again. Emily. This time I answered. Hi. Her voice sounded almost cheerful. I talked to Mom. I waited. She says she's willing to forgive you. I actually laughed. Forgive me? She thinks both of you made mistakes. I see. If you apologize, we can put all of this behind us. I stayed quiet for a moment, then asked one question. Is she still living in our apartment? Yes. Are the rules still hanging on the wall? Emily hesitated. Yes. Then nothing has changed. Jason, why are you being so stubborn? I'm not. I just refuse to apologize for refusing to be controlled. Her tone became colder. So you're choosing your pride over your family? No, I'm choosing my self-respect. She hung up. The next morning I received a text from Linda, the first one she'd ever sent me. A real man knows when to admit he's wrong. I looked at the message, smiled, then blocked her number. 5 minutes later, Emily texted, "Did you seriously block my mother?" I replied with one sentence, "She's no longer my responsibility." A minute later, another message arrived. "You're making this divorce inevitable." I stared at the screen, then typed my first long reply since leaving. "Emily, your mother didn't ruin our marriage. She only showed me something I should have seen much earlier. I wasn't competing with your mother. I was competing for my own place in my marriage, and I lost the moment you chose her over me." After sending it, I put the phone away. For the first time all week, I felt completely calm. The next day, I filed for divorce. Emily called me several times after receiving the papers. She cried, she apologized. She promised things would be different. She even said Linda would move out. But by then, it wasn't about Linda anymore. It was about the fact that my own wife had looked me in the eyes and told me to leave my own home. The divorce was finalized a few months later. During the property division, we sold the apartment and split the money. Linda finally found her own place. Ironically, Emily moved in with her. A mutual friend told me they started arguing within a couple of months. Apparently, living with someone who always has rules isn't nearly as enjoyable as enforcing those rules on someone else. As for me, I rented a small apartment, bought the biggest coffee maker I could find, and put exactly one rule on my refrigerator. No one gets to tell me how to live in my own home. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.